Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We relate with the world, both the one that we carry on the inside, internally in our minds, in our hearts, and the world outside of us, the one that we constantly are interpreting, holding a position against or for. Primarily through the four elements the Buddha describes. So the world becomes manifest to the mind through its four elements. And when we say four elements, that's an image, that's a metaphor, if you will, that was abundant at the time of the Buddha and his contemporaries, a way of interpreting the world. And they're not necessarily just, let's say, earth, water, fire, air, etc. But they're qualities. So the sensation, or rather the relationship that we have with hardness, for example, is seen as the earth element. The liquidy or fluidy characteristic of things that we experience are referred to as the water element. The fiery or heat generating friction causing characteristic can be seen as the fire element, something that bellows up out of nowhere sometimes. And the airy or pressure-inducing sensations of things that we experience are seen as the air element. Now, these can be seen from different angles, so they have different layerings to them, depending on what is coming in through the six sense doors. Often the mind fluctuates in granting a reality status, if you will, between the understanding of the world inside and the world outside. So the mind gets confused oftentimes with what is truly happening on the outside versus what is happening on the inside. Scientists were baffled when they discovered this, how even a person who's lying down in bed, if you present them with certain images that prompt them to behave in a certain way physically, even though they were in bed, those same muscles became active, as if they were engaged in the dynamic manifestation of that action, physically doing it as if actively engaged in it, but they were not. But the muscles were, because the brain was interpreting. The mind was seeing both as indistinguishable. In the Rāhula Sutta of the Anguttara Nikāya, Book of Fours, the Buddha asks his son, Rāhula, to become more observant of these four elements. And he encourages Rāhula to see these four elements that come in through the six sense doors, whether they're perceived by him in the internal sense or the external sense. He says, the earth element is just earth element. In a sense, the hardness is to be seen as hardness, solidity. Now, these images need to be properly translated for each of us in the mind, because we have different interpretative methods. So when we hear the word hardness or solidity, some of us might think of an actual solid object, or earth, a handful of dirt, for example, or pebbles, or a piece of wood. Not necessarily, though. So we need to look at these four elements contextually, if you will, such as the solid position we have towards a certain idea, a person, a feeling, a memory, an attitude. Is it solid? Is it so rigid, almost immovable? And sometimes we feel ourselves kind of fluid-like, going through difficulties or challenges during the day. It's like the air, the water element, or even the hindrances as they come in and try to dominate the mind, and they flow in from everywhere like a flood. When the rivers overflow, and all of a sudden you have dwellings just being taken away, enveloped with the water, the influx, the inflow of water. So similarly, we might find anger, for example, flowing in and taking over what used to be, or what seemed to be, a very tranquil state. Something happened. The six sense doors brought something. And because of the lack of mindfulness, all of a sudden, we're overrun by these thoughts that have come in from every corner. And all of a sudden we feel the fire element, perhaps, just all of a sudden coming up, and the heart is full of fire, of hatred, anger. The mind, tumultuous. The tranquility, gone. Or when we get to a state of delusion, which usually happens when the mind, again, is not mindful, not present. This is where the third hindrance, the grouping of two, tinhamida, sloth and torpor, that absent-mindedness, sleepiness takes over, and we're not there. The awareness is not there. There's a major lack, a deficit in wisdom, discernment, and life is being wasted. It's like the air element. But all these four, in order for them to use up our precious time, they need to be clung to by the individual. And the Buddha's advice, admonition, encouragement to Rāhula, his son, was to observe constantly these four elements coming in through the six sense bases. And for him to constantly observe and not distinguish necessarily between what solidity feels like on the internally versus what it is like outside, because they both are pointing at the same or to the same thing. But why? Why was it necessary for the Buddha to point this out? Well, he was after helping Rāhula, a bhikkhu, to see the relationship of craving that holds these things together, glued together, because of the identification of it is me, I am in it, I am it attitude. This is my feeling. This is my anger, my position towards this. It's so hard and solid. And it is non-negotiable. Well, that attitude itself comes from the craving. But the more the person becomes observant of these different facets of life taking place every single moment, but become only manifested in front of the magnifying glass or under the magnifying glass of sati. And clear comprehension is the light that puts on this, the spotlight. And all of a sudden we see what's happening. And we see the pattern, and that pattern induces the sense of disenchantment within the mind of the person. And this disenchantment unlocks, removes the chains, the linkage, the craving that binds the mind to the sense of identification towards how these four elements are being interpreted from moment to moment. And then the Buddha finishes the sutta by saying, and with the eradication of craving, and cutting cleanly through the fetters, the sanyojanas, the 10 fetters, but especially the comparing and contrasting attitude of the mind that is so pervasive, that is so deep in our minds. Conceit, mana, with the relinquishing, with the eradication of mana. I am better than you, you are better than me, we are equal to each other, all three of them. And then the mind is freed from these shackles, and the person becomes one of the arahants. Putting an end to all suffering. So when we study the suttas, when we study the Dhamma, it's important for us to constantly look at how is this relatable to me, to my unique situations, to my personality, to my past history that has such a big stronghold of my life. So when we're reading the suttas, when we're exposing ourselves to the suttas, and not necessarily commentaries on the suttas, it's always encouraged to go back to the suttas. We can see different angles of entry points. And things that we thought we saw, understood yesterday, all of a sudden takes on a different meaning today. I noticed this in my own practice some time ago when I noticed the Patavi, which is the earth element. Solidity. Think of a solid cube, a dense steel, let's say, metal cube that's so hard to penetrate. And sometimes they come in varying sizes. When a person is dealing with anger or experiencing depression, when one would ask them, how does it feel? Can you make it tangible? That also always seems to be strange initially. But then they start to see how, yeah, it does have a shape. It does have a distinct dimension to it. And suddenly, this thing that was such a big hindrance, a big boulder on their path of living a healthy life, becomes tangible, becomes relatable. So I encourage you to look at the four elements from an angle that makes your life and the difficulties and the challenges that you are going through more apparent. And because, we are different learners, different ways of perceiving things are there for each of us. Spending some time becoming intimate with the way that it functions, the way we interpret the world, internally, as the Buddha says, and externally. You don't have to believe in the four elements, etc. I mean, periodic table is over 117, 120, I think, by now. It's not those elements that we're talking about. It's the characteristics. And the characteristics that have something to do with our functionality, the way we see and process our feelings, our thoughts, our lives, our experiences. Because the Dhamma is not separate from the experiences we have. The Dhamma is not something out there. When Nibbana occurs, it has to do with your life in relation to you, the experiences you have lived through, are living through. That's why it's such a personal journey. But there are some key formulaic structures, maps that the Buddha provided for us that we can always go back to and refer and see if there's any coherence, anything that could resonate. And even if it's not there, usually it means that we got so thick layers of our own commentaries running constantly. That's why I always say, please leave your debating mind aside when you're approaching the suttas or when you're listening to a Dhamma talk. Please put those aside. Otherwise, it's just full of contention. Your mind is full of argument-seeking attitudes. So, not to look at the suttas or read them or listen to them as if you would listen to or read a novel or a newspaper. Because we need to do the work ourselves. And any clues we get as to how this works, because we're working against the kileshas, the most supremely trained, powerful spies, they know us best. And they never take a holiday. They never take time out. They're always sharpening their knives, their skill sets, their tools, their weapons to come at us. And that's why this path is all about wisdom and discernment, understanding. We're not working in the dark. We're not groping in the dark. But for that to happen, we need to have some understanding of the Dhamma to begin with. But leaving ourselves aside, like the identification that the Buddha was talking about to Rāhula, identifying oneself with these four elements, as the sixth sense doors constantly pour in more data, there needs to be a disconnect, a cutting off of that sense of identity with these things. And that happens the more and more we allow there to be some space between us. It's like a toxic relationship. If you ever had a toxic relationship with an ex, for example, a partner, any kind, and you say, you know what, I think I need to lower the frequency of my exposure to this person, to this environment. Perhaps in small doses, I can accept this person's presence. Come on, slowly you actually create this space between yourself and these things that have been sucking your energy, taking so much of your valuable life and time. And slowly you become disenchanted. So can we have such a relationship with our six senses, whatever they're bringing in, whether it's solid, whether it's fluidy, whether it's heat-oriented, fiery, or whether it's airy in quality. So that's what I would like to share with you today. And I'd like to hear your thoughts, comments related with this, or obviously with your practice, any issues you might be having. Yes, Lilith.
Thank you, Bhante, for very to the point, how to say that? To the point talk. Sorry for my English. You were very right, and see that today was there was 15 minutes of break in my sitting, and I was exactly fighting with this one of these elements, the solidity, and I was trying to understand from where it's coming from, and and during the day, my meetings with some people, I understand that it comes from this comparison. I was comparing something with me and somebody with me, and all the time, all this half an hour. Afterwards, I just wake up because my head was aching. And during your talk, I was thinking, and taking into account Upadisa's question about saint people who became arahants. Is there any healthy comparison vs toxic comparison? I don't know if I could say like that.
Excellent question. Yes, there is. And there's a sutta, my memory is so bad, I must apologize. I think 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I worked on a sutta in Anguttara Nikāya, again, Book of Fours, where I believe it was Venerable Sariputta who was addressing someone's question on craving and mana or comparison, conceit. And he says the person is asking basically, is there such a thing? That's the context of the conversation, anyhow. Is there such a thing or a situation where conceit can be something positive? Is there, a way that it can turn into something positive? And not just conceit, he's talking about craving, for example, also prior to that. And he says, yes. If that bhikkhuni can become an arahant, so can I. That is mana. But it's an instigating factor. It's a trigger point. It triggers you to see that somebody's actually attained the ending of all suffering. So it is doable, you're saying. Yeah, there she goes. She's walking around. She's an arahant. You mean to say she's also a human being? She's got 2 legs, 2 arms, a head. So do I. So I can do that? Yes. Now the person starts to generate within them an unbefore-seen level of energy, commitment, determination, strength, faith, etc., etc. And they introduce all these factors into their practice, into their way of life. Now they're holding their sila very carefully. They're protecting it as if they're protecting their own healthy eyes. And slowly, slowly they start to develop. And the time comes where the mana itself drops off. The thing that actually carried them to Nibbana, and they become an arahant themselves. Years ago, when they first started, NASA started the shuttle missions, they didn't have a shuttle that could take off from the ground like a normal jet or a plane. So they used to use a 747 jumbo airplane. So they had a special installation on top of the roof of this 747. And the shuttle would rest on it. And the jumbo jet would take off from the ground, and it would go up to higher elevations. And then the shuttle would turn on its engines and then take off and come loose, and then boom, it goes out of the atmosphere. Now, conceit can become just like the jumbo 747. Craving can do the same thing, because there's also some element of craving when you're seeing an arahant and saying, hey, I want some of that. I mean, after all, we're all sitting meditating here. Why? Because sometimes, somewhere in our past, we said, you know what? I want some of that. I want to be calm and quiet. I don't want to be dominated by my feelings or fears or terrors or whatever it may be. I want to be a little bit more stable. Somebody triggered something, or sutta, or something we heard or seen. And that's a craving or desire, but even then, that's not a bad thing until it gets us to the atmosphere and we take off out of it. So yes, absolutely, the Buddha talks about those, and or at least his arahants. And it's important for us to be inspired. I mean, when you go to school, even when we were kindergarten students, we would see adults talking, and I used to be mesmerized when I would hear my teachers speak. Like, wow, look at him form a whole sentence. It's like, how did they just, it's beautiful, the verb, this, oh, that's what they're talking about, object and subject and this. Oh, look how he used the adjectives here. Oh, wow, there's an adverb. Oh, I wonder if I can also do, what is that? That's laying the seeds. So yes, absolutely. Now, if we allow craving to dominate us, that's the problem. When we allow mana or conceit to dominate us, and it's one of the hardest sangyojanas, the hardest fetters to get rid of. There's a lot of people in meditation, in the meditation arena, I would say, that are stuck there. Bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, and non-bhikkhunis and bhikkhus. Because it's so pervasive, it's so deep, it's almost like cancer pervading everywhere. And that's why we have to use the tools that the Buddha gave us. Apply the five spiritual faculties, apply the 7 factors of awakening, and they're right there. You cannot miss them. It's so much in front of you. It's like so abundantly clear to see. But how willing is the person? And that's where the craving comes in. I have a status to protect. I have a title or something like that, or I've attained these things. And that's why it becomes such a huge, huge, huge bond, like a shackle, sangyojana, that's so hard to let go of, because one is run on ignorance. The kileshas are dominating the person's heart, not the Dhamma, ultimately. So we need to know when to let go of the 747 and allow the shuttle to take off and do its thing, until the day comes where the shuttle can actually take off from the ground. And that's what an arahant is. I apologize to the sasana for trivializing it perhaps by using NASA. But I use a lot of metaphors even in my therapeutic work, as well as the Dhamma, as you can tell. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it answers my question, and there's coming another stupid one. Sorry for that, but I need to ask it because this conversation and this talk is very diagnostic one for me, for myself, because I'm at the point in my practice where I want to establish that engine which will take the shuttle into the space or air. I don't know how to say that. It's the sky, atmosphere. And I understand with my mind that I need that craving to make it like healthy craving for that. The stupid question is how to do that. If it is I don't know, if it I'm not sure what it is. Is it fear, or is it doubt, or is it I'm not really sure, because maybe from your point of view it's more clear, but I didn't find this problem where it comes from, but I really cannot for this moment establish this engine. And I'm like going round and round and round on the ground and trying to find the way. Yeah, that's it.
Because the other engine is running. And that is your cognition. See, each of us has a predominant way of interpreting the world and trying to make sense of things. Some people are very emotion or feeling based. They try to understand, through feelings, etc. Intuitive or something. And then there's those that are more intellectually inclined. Things have to make sense intellectually first before one allows oneself to kind of say, okay, now I can rest. You will not find an end to that. There's no finish line to that, I'm sad to say. So long as that engine is running. And in the beginning, I don't know if you were there before we sat, I mentioned how noble silence is not necessarily having to do with the lips and the tongue and the teeth and the mouth and the face and facial muscles. That's not necessarily noble silence if you maintain quiet with your mouth. Real noble silence takes place in the mind. Typically, we say if you're experiencing or if you're in the second jhana, whereas there is no vitakka vichara or thinking and pondering, the chit chat stops. The late Bhante Katukurunde Nyanananda, who wrote the marvelous book Concept and Reality, he talks about this as subvocal speech. Subvocal speech. And in fact, it's one of the key ingredients that needs to disappear in order for us to go even deeper into cessation of feeling and perception. Think of it as the ninth jhana, for example. So, but there is an investment. You've lived your whole life interpreting the world thanks to this engine. So there's so much trust, but it is a toxic relationship that you have with your brain, with your, it should not dominate oneself. The wisdom has to be there. And I think from what I remember from your question now, what is the tool? I think that's what I saw coming out of your question. What is the tool? Very simple, sati. Can you catch it in mid-sentence when your mind is saying, no, I need an answer that makes logical sense first? The equation has to be perfect on this blackboard or whiteboard first, before I allow myself to calm down, before I allow myself to sit. It's all mata if you think of it. It's just hindrances, because what is the flavor of all this thinking process? Restlessness. Restlessness is taking place. It's all over the place. The mind is there. And if you have that, there cannot be wisdom. There cannot be tranquility of mind. So first we need to pull back. And that's where applying the 7 factors of awakening is crucial. Not necessarily adding more energy, because that's going to just fan the flames of restlessness. No, I need to sit harder. Take a deep breath. Sometimes it's necessary for you to get up and walk around and do something else. Drink a cup of water. Make your bed. Something totally different. And then come back to your sitting. So sati is crucial. Sati is not to be trifled with. It's such a powerful key. It's such a powerful tool. But it needs always to be holding hands with sampajanya, with wisdom, clearly understanding and seeing. Another word for that is Dhamma Vichaya, which is the second of the 7 factors of awakening. So what you do is you pull back from that intense moment when your brain is so actively engaged, not adding more virya, but instead pulling back and bringing more passaddhi, which is tranquility factor. Just fall back into even breath meditation. Who cares about the technique at that point. Anything that works. If you're drowning in the water and you don't know how to swim or you're exhausted, who cares if it's a life raft, if it's a driftwood, floating something? Who cares? Whether it's blue, red, white, you're going to grab hold of it for dear life. So we use these tools. And the Buddha did not expect us to be applying all of these at the same time, with the same level until we get a PhD level understanding of. No. Whatever works at that time, and just drop it. Go back into your practice. So I hope that helps. Don't forget to smile. Yes, KK.
Thank you so much. I want to go back to the first thing you said today, which is noble silence, and relate that to the 4 elements you talk about today, and also relate to, I don't know whether I say her name correctly, Arabic question to you and your answer, saying that the same thing sometimes can be a hindrance, can be toxic, but it can also be enabling and inspiring. So all these seems a jumble of different thoughts, but to my mind is all related. So to go back to your noble silence, you said it's not just about lips and mouth, but I think it's also related, because I think the reason, for instance, I usually like to remain silent at the beginning is one, thinking that some people may have to leave early, and I want you to be able to start the meditation early. But the other reason is that I really want to listen to my fellow participants, because I learned so much from them. And then I just also want to relate to my very fruitful conversation with my son, because he is of course always afraid that, because he has an episode staying home, that I'm going to be nagging him and all that. And then I didn't know that, and then I thought, hey, how come you just never talk to me? And then we finally have a really productive talk, and he said, because I don't want to be lectured at, sometimes I talk to you, I just want you to listen. I say, you are so right. So I really learned, since he said that, to not to, just say, I told him I just want to be a friend. I really don't want to be a mom. He's 24. I say our goal is the same. I want him to be fully independent, but I do worry about him. But I do kind of feel sad that he doesn't talk to me when he's depressed or when he's happy. So we have been doing that, because I do not try to interrupt him. I do not try to tell him, oh, I think you should do this or that. So I just want to relate that. And then to the metaphors, when you talk about the 4 elements. So to me, 3 things really jump out with the idea of silence. One is stone. Silence is like stone. So stone can be good and bad. Stone is strength, is hard, but it's also something you cannot crack. So sometimes cracking is good. So the first is stone. The second one is water. So most people, including a novel that I read, associate water with voice, but actually water is also silent, and yet it's fluid, it's moving. And then the third one is from the idiom, ice, we break the ice. And sometimes, you feel that it's good to break the ice. But I thought to myself, for me, that's the easiest to do. Anytime you call me, KK, I can ask you a question, because your talk stimulates so many thoughts. But I think it is harder if in some way to kind of remain silent and listen to other people. And so I just want to, and it's something that is both can be so liberating, breaking silence, but it can also be really intrusive and keep our mind from being still, to keep that noble silence. So thank you.
there needs to be a purpose for whatever we do. That's what we learn from the Dhamma, from the life of the Buddha. There needs to be a purpose. So when we mention, talk about noble silence, what for?
Mhm.
So there needs to be the development of something that wasn't there or is it's in infancy. There's more things to come. But if we lay the seeds of whatever it is, insights, wisdom, whatever, there's still seeds. If we mess around with the soil on top of that seed, even if we water it, etc., it's not going to amount to much and the seed will die. So noble silence, for example, is helpful to not just understand what our friends or people around us are saying quietly, but also get to a point where we understand our position and attitudes towards what they're saying. So that is the central focus. Because ignorance, when we talk about ignorance or wisdom or nibbana, it's not about someone else's ignorance. This is where the Buddha was pointing the finger at the world outside and the other finger, the thumb, back to the internal world. This is, again, another form of mana or conceit, comparison that is constant. That's why it's so pervasive. So the mind of the noble disciple is quiet. It's in noble silence because they have to be. Because it's so comforting. It's such an oasis. It's a place where the seeds grow and take them to the path, fruit, and nibbana. So there is a purpose. It's not just quiet and that's it. So, questions, comments, and thoughts? I don't know if I saw. Yes, Russell.
Yeah, thank you, Bhante. When you were talking about the elements, recently I was taking a class at UCLA on Chinese medicine and East-West medicine and that type of thing. Then when you talked about the qualitative, talking about the qualities of, of water or earth, and not just the literal substance, it really reminded me of things like, well, in Chinese medicine or in the I Ching, when they talk about the elements, their fluidity, and the qualities of the elements interacting with the person in order to create health or sickness. They're talking about it in medical terms, but you're talking about it in terms of practice or spiritual terms, but it really kind of turned on a little light, a dim light in my head that, maybe that there is this kind of elemental relationship across, not across thinking, but across how people, from different times and maybe even different cultures, are looking at these kind of dimensions, as you said, the internal and the external. Since Chinese medicine seems to look at, at both, at, how the internal affects the external and how the external affects the internal. And they do really, talk about things like inflammation, heat, or dampness, fluid, wetness, and as you know. So I thought it was really, maybe I'm kind of off, but that's what clicked in my head. But, it's morning here, so, Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that addition. Absolutely. It reminded me of when I was studying TCM years ago, traditional Chinese medicine, and I, we come in with our bag of interpretations, right? So I knew, the sign, the yin and yang, or the Tai Chi symbol, yin and yang. So I thought, I had heard the yin representing the negative or the female or something like that. And the yang would be the opposite, positive and active, etc. And then the professor said, not exactly. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, they can fluctuate depending on the context, depending on the situation. So it's very much like fluid. It's contextual, if you will. It's very organic. So even when we talk about any of these principles, even Nibbana itself can become a hindrance when the person is so fixated on it, tunnel visioned. So wisdom arises when there is a deeper level of understanding of the relationships of everything that we're studying, the relationships. That's where, that's why there is so much wisdom lacking in the world today. Why? Because there's a lack of mental cultivation. Why? Because there's a major lack in morality and virtues in the world today. So it's a very much organic, it's flowing. And I love the Tai Chi symbol, the yin and yang, because it challenged my own understanding, my rigid understanding of, yin is this and yang is that, and that's the end of the story. No, it's not. So thank you for that. Any other thoughts? And Chitta, do you have? I think I saw a hand. Yes, Greg.
Thank you.
Chitta. And then Greg.
Yeah, thank you. As usual, I will comment on something from a previous week. Usually takes me a little while to digest what you're saying, but I put into practice what you suggested. I think it was last week, about when because there was an episode this week where I was extremely tired, and I decided that when I went for a walk on my lunchtime to bring the awareness into the body, and I was smiling through the heart into the body, and the effect it had was absolutely amazing. So I just really want to say thank you, because my mind became so collected because of the solidity of the body, the grossness of the body as an object. But because I was smiling through it, it generated so much joy, and then energy arose, and then my mindfulness was absolutely amazing, and my mind was so collected. It's probably the most collected it's been in a good while, actually. And that stemmed from a situation where I was really tired, and I was lacking sati. I was restless, and I was full of sloth. So I just wanted to say thank you, because just so that you know that what you're saying is getting put into practice, because it was really absolutely amazing, and I can't thank you enough for that. So thank you.
I'm glad. I'm really glad to hear that. You're applying it and you're seeing evidence of that. As you're describing it, I remember the suttas where, one of them, where the Buddha is sick himself. And there's two other episodes in two different suttas where Venerable Ananda, I think, I forget their names, in this situation where they're also sick, probably been Venerable Mahakastapa, where the Buddha, in the case of the Buddha, for example, he tells the monk to recite to him the 7 factors of awakening, Satta Bojjhanga. And that brings, this is the Buddha. He's the one who gave the Satta Bojjhangas, the Dhamma, the Suttas, right? So he's asking a monk to tell him, to recite to him the 7 factors of awakening to heal his body, to reduce the pain. And guess what? At the end of each of these 3 incidents with the other 2 arahants and the other 2 monks, I'm sorry, because I believe one of them was Ananda. He was an arahant then. The pain is gone. And they're fully seeing the pain, seeing the suffering body, but the tension in the body is reduced tremendously. And they get up and walk around. So yes, definitely, it is a healing. It has a direct impact on the quality of your physiology, and I'm glad to hear that that's what you're discovering for yourself as well. Beautiful. Greg, did you have your hand up? Yes.
So I was reading some time ago now, someone writing about one of the suttas, and it had a comment, had a quote: "Abandon one quality, monks, and I guarantee you non-return. Which one?" And I went, aha, there's only one. Let me find that one. So I was somewhat disappointed to find that the next verse has the same thing with another quality, and then the next verse has the same thing with another quality. And when you make a list of all those qualities, there's quite a list. So I wanted to get that list and obviously work on them all, but then came the confusion between translating from Pali into English and using English words. And when I researched those words, unfortunately, some of the translations are wrong, and people translate words and they certainly use defilements and fetters interchangeably, and they're not interchangeable. But then the other complicating factor is that there are some words like conceit that are in two of the two lists. And I'm trying to find out what the kalishas are, the samyojanas are, and what the asavas are. And I watched last night your video on the kalishas, because this is now becoming, well, it's my current level of importance to try and sort out what's on the lists and what they all actually are, because even sometimes the English word doesn't describe it very well. And in another discussion I had in another group, and trying to understand the difference between kalishas, samyojanas, and asavas, which are the three groups of things now, and let me know if there's another one I should be working on as well. But the story, the picture, the analogy that was given me was like a tree, where the kalishas are the outer branches, and we can prune away at the kalishas, but unless we get down through the branches and down to the root of the products, then those defilements or kalishas are likely to grow back. So the samyojanas were likened to the stronger branches, and the asavas were the roots. And really it was the asavas that we need to work on. And when we can remove the asavas out of our personality and out of our habits, that's where we're likely to make some progress. And as I said, the defilements were likened to those branches that even no matter how much we prune them, they're likely to grow back, and the asavas were important. And I'm just wondering if, given your video that I saw last night, focusing on kalishas, and the fact that there are some words in both lists, like conceits, both a defilement and a fetter, according to the lists I looked at, and I'm struggling to get the lists correct, but just at the moment, just focus on, without talking about the words, just the branches and the trunk and the roots thing. Are asavas, in your mind, more important to work on and to eradicate, or do you disagree with that analogy of the tree?
It's a metaphor. It's an analogy that one person or several people came together and produced it. I wouldn't necessarily 100% agree with the analogy vis-a-vis the kileshas and the asavas or the samyojanas. They can be interchangeable with the outer branches or the leaves on the branches, etc., etc. But who cares? Ultimately, it's like in using something from therapy. The most successful therapists I've seen as I was studying or as I've been practicing over the years are those who don't just look at the assessment, for example, that have been collected word for word, and looking at the assessment sheet and all the psychosocial, all these things, case conceptualizations we call them, from previous therapists, previous providers, healthcare professionals. Meanwhile, the person is sitting right there across from me. The asavas, which I call contaminants, are right there. But I was like, hold on, hey, excuse me, I need to figure this out before I actually look into your eyes. I can feel you. I can see your relevancy in my life. In the way I'm even looking at this list. So because you asked for my input, I would say, forget about the list. Toss it away. I mean, it's good to have a conceptual understanding, of course, that we can later apply. But when it becomes a hindrance, when it starts to suffocate us, not allowing us to create this relationship of understanding with the defilements or kileshas or the sanyojanas or the asavas. Of course, there's a different layering of these. Some time ago, I've given up on the proper designation of which story of the building, you know, if it's a 3-story building, which story does the kileshas fall into? I've given up on that because in my practice, I've seen that to be futile, unnecessary. I know a kilesha when I see one, and there are a lot of them. On a daily basis, you see, you look, you see in things, and then all of a sudden your brain says, there's supposed to be this sangyoja. Where is this? Okay, are you comparing? Oh, this was comparison. Ah, what's that? You smell, and then you see mana there. Ah, okay. So it's a difference in approaching the situation because the person has the availability of choosing whether to engage through life and understand the kilesha's role through your own personal life instead of the hermeneutical mechanism or tool or instrument of someone else, in this case, the metaphor. Even those images that I'm presenting, you know, they might mesh well or they might not. But getting an understanding is some rough idea of, okay, the asavas. What are the asavas? Usually they're called taints. Like, what is a taint? Like, is that a color? Is it a smudge? So many of these English words, like formations for sankharas, is like, I've lost decades of my life basing, I'm not kidding, on these English words, like concentration, which is another problem. Until I had to write a dissertation on it to figure, you know, to explain to myself and to the world what samadhi is, contrary to how these scholars had been interpreting and translating. But it messed up years of my life. That's why you will never see me use the word concentration until it is contextually specific to that particular form of exercise, mental exercise. And it's very narrow in all Dhamma. It's collectedness or stability of mind, which leaves room for wisdom to occur. Anyhow, asavas, other people have called it influxes. Well, it's like leakage. I see them as leakage. They could be leaking out or they could be leaking in. Of what? Well, one of them that is very interesting that I had to struggle with understanding is bhavasava. To become, to be, basically removing yourself from this particular experience to place yourself, in your mind at least, in a different series of scenarios that are better than this. Basically, the quintessential image of the grass is greener on the other side of the hill. Another life, another circumstance. Yeah, this is not working. Let me go there. Avijjasava, kamasava. There's also, sometimes people mention also ditthasava, or the views. So it's important, don't get me wrong. It's important to get these. That's why I don't use just a single English word oftentimes. Even when I'm doing my translations, you will find me using more than one or an entire sentence, a shortened sentence to describe one single word in Pali. And sometimes I would just leave the Pali alone and keep using it because there's no equivalent to it. but try my best to explain it. So, and this is something that I brought up to one of the prominent Bhikkhu scholars, actually two of them, in the past, without naming names. And one in particular, I asked, or I put my concern in front of this, gathering. I said, it's so crucial for us as Dhamma teachers, and especially translators, to at least keep the Pali in some form there in the sentence, in a footnote somewhere, so that the person could relate to, understand, or do some further exploration, instead of using, a free license to go ahead and come up with any word that they want, the translator. So we carry a lot of responsibility, and we should never toil with, mess around with the Dhamma, because future generations might actually be dependent on how you and I are interpreting it here. So I completely understand where you're coming from. And yes, the conceptual understanding needs to be there. If it need be, use the Pali words, but ultimately though, put the list away and engage with the asavas in a direct manner, because they're all about you. They're all about me. The suttas, or the Dhamma is not in the suttas. The kileshas are not in the suttas. They're in our hearts. And that's not just like woohoo, new agey way of describing. No, they're there. And in our minds. And trying to stay away from adding more things onto who Greg is. It's so important. It's like, I don't know if you recall, but several weeks ago, I gave the image of, for me, this has been very poignant. It was like hilarious when I saw it in my head, like an elephant trying to wear an elephant suit in order for it to feel like an elephant. Doesn't have to be. So I hope that kind of helps, or I don't know. What do you think?
Well, it's great that I have your input about not studying the lists too much, but there's got to be some formation of a concept in the beginning, so I know what it is I can ignore and the difference between them. So yeah, it helps. Thank you.
I'm glad. All right, we're over a little bit and we have to close, unfortunately. I have other things to attend to, moving again. So not too far this time. So let's do dedication of merits. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find health relief. May all beings share in these merits that we have thus acquired for the acquisition and achievement of all kinds of wholesome happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share in these merits. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you for being here. Keep the good fight. It is a fight. It is a fight. It is work. And we need to sharpen our weapons of sati and sampajanya, willingness to unfold and discover more and go deeper and never, ever relent in our work until we actually taste final nibbana. But playfully. Be well. Smiling. Till next time.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Of course.
Thank you, Bhante.
Be well.